Welcome to another segment of the DollarSenseShow.com, making sense of every dollar. This is Bob Hutchinson. Glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about money and credit. And before we get started, just a quick reminder, we are not investment advisors and we're not giving investment advice. And in fact, we're not giving any professional advice. That this is for educational purposes only. So, and there are no warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy of any of this. This is for educational purposes only. All right. So let's begin. Um, Money typically is, well, we all know what currency is, right? We know a $5 bill or $100 bill when we see one. Um, but what really is money? Well, money is something that is typically has various attributes. The first of which is that it's like a medium of exchange. In other words, it's something we give in exchange for value. So we go to the grocery store, we take that $20 bill and we buy something. And for that, we give the cashier a $20 bill and then we get some change. That is an example, of course, of a medium of exchange. It's also considered typically to be a store of value. And what that means is the overall idea is that whatever it is, it's something that will retain value. And ideally, the amount won't vary really that much. Now, in practice, sometimes it does, and we'll talk about that. Um, it it's a unit of account. So it's something that we can say X dollars is X units, or the currency is X units of something that, again, will more or less remain stable from time to time. But at the end of the day, the main thing is that money really comes from and derives itself from production. Um, in ancient civilizations, early on, things started out as a barter system. I've got 10 apples, you got 10 carrots, or whatever. We'll trade. Well, I mean, it became cumbersome, of course, to walk around with a bushel of carrots or uh, uh, a, a barrel of apples, So instead, money was used, and often, and actually for hundreds of years, the currency would be backed by gold. In other words, a dollar could be redeemed for a certain amount of gold. Um, and so the, the dollar bill, for example, became um, what is called a fiat currency, FIAT, a fiat currency. Um, but with a gold standard, everyone knew that that's really what it meant. And really, to take it a step further, when most countries, most major economies and countries were on the gold standard, there was no currency fluctuation, more or less, right? Things were stable. So the unit of account remained the same, whether it was in this country or another country. And it was a store of value. I think it was in 1974, and President Nixon took this country off the gold standard. And at that time, gold was uh, for a dollar was at $35 an ounce. So $35 for 1 ounce of gold is equal to $1. Now, some of you know what it is today, but some of you probably don't. Today, it's September 16th, 2025. Today, it's over $3,700 an ounce. And that the difference between those two times and those two amounts is inflation. And um, and inflation is really a debasement of the currency. And let me further explain. Um, One of the great economists of all time, Milton Friedman, said inflation is essentially always a monetary event, meaning monetary having referring to money, meaning that if you print more money, that currency ordinarily is going to be worth less, generally is going to be worth less. Now, let me give you an example. During the Roman Empire, coins were struck from gold and other metals. But let's take a gold example, and let's say I go to a market and I have 10 apples, and I exchange that for a coin that is gold. All right, so I come back a week later, but this time the merchant or the government has inserted 1/10 of of the gold coin with lead. All right. So in other words, the gold coin only has 90% gold. And so while I exchanged last week 10 apples, this time around, that coin is not worth the same, right? It's worth less. So it's worth 10% less. Instead of me exchanging my 10 apples, I'm going to say, no, I'm going to give you 9 apples because it's worth 10% less. So I'm going to give you 10% less. And then let's say I come back a week after that. And then at that point, another 10% has been taken from the coin so that it's at 80%. Well, at that point, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to give you 8 apples, not 9, not 10, because you've reduced the value. The currency is been reduced by 20%. That is inflation. And so, I mean, we don't use gold coins today, right? But and as we all know, we use paper money. Well, and that's why here we say printing money, watch it. I mean, you keep printing more and more money. Well, I mean, in fact, that currency becomes worth less. Why? Because what you have is more paper chasing fewer goods, or more paper chasing the same amount of goods. So, and that is the classic idea of inflation. Um, so and just to get back to production for a minute, that is the source of money, and so the idea is that the money really does not grow on trees. Now I know you know that on one level, but on another level, um, some people really don't understand where money comes from. And they assume that the money will come from, well, somewhere else. And you see this all the time with politicians. Um, well, I will promise you the sun, the moon, and the stars, and all you have to do is vote for me. And then I get elected, I get into office, and well, I don't have the money to do all this. So what do I do? Well, one thing I can do, and you see this all the time. These politicians will go back to Washington D.C. and they'll say, "Hey, hands up, uh, I want more money, or we need more money." And they say, "Well, we don't have any more money." And then they go, "Oh, okay." Then they go back and they are utterly clueless. They are financially illiterate. And so then what do? Well, they raise taxes. And of course, to sell, the idea, it's like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. They say, well, it won't come out of your pocket. It's only going to come out of the pocket of the super rich. And I will just tell you, when I went to law school a long time ago and I took federal taxation, one of the first things they taught is when you raise taxes, the higher it gets, the less people will pay. I mean, they'll find a reason not to pay. They'll move. They'll leave. And actually a great example of that are the Beatles. I mean, I think we all remember them. Well, why was it that they all wound up in this country? Well, I'll tell you why. The tax rates were way lower than they were in the UK. And so, I mean, in the UK at that time, I think they were on the order of like 90 or 95%. And, of course, it's like, why work, right? If I give all the money to the government. So, um, it's super useful to understand that that's where the money comes from. And what you'll hear a lot of unsophisticated people say is, well, I don't want this program or that government program or this or that, and they'll say, "You're mean." Well, it's not being mean, it's just the money's not there. No different from a child going to his parents saying, "I want more money for," whatever, fill in the blank, right? And the parent says, "No," and the child says, "You're mean." Well, actually, the mother or the father, they're trying to figure out how to best use the money for food, clothing, shelter, things like that, for the benefit of their kids, right? So they're anything but mean, you know. They're trying to do the best they can for the kids. But in defense of kids, and we've all been there, right? The kid doesn't know any better. But as an adult, we need to understand these things, and we need to have these kinds of adult conversations. And that's exactly part of what we're doing in in these podcasts, is to arm you with the facts, arm you with the knowledge, so that you can gain this understanding and make decisions. Now, you might say, well, what does all this have to do with you? Well, it has everything to do with you. Why? Well, let's consider the Weimar Republic in Germany. I mean, a lot of us know about that, but some don't. What happened was, in order to meet its obligations, the government in Germany um, started printing money, and that turned into massive inflation. And that in turn turned into what is called hyperinflation. And that it was so bad that it was said that you could fill a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks in order to buy one loaf of bread. In other words, the currency had become almost worthless because they kept printing money and there was nothing behind it. In other words, it wasn't supported by gold or anything of underlying value. And so, and you might at first blush think, well, gee, that's really too bad for Germany. Well, except that it went way beyond that, right? Because because of the enormous bankruptcies and economic collapse and the tremendous suffering of the German people, this led to the rise in a material way to Adolf Hitler. And, it would have been one thing if Hitler just stayed in Germany, but as we know, he didn't, right? He set out to conquer the world. And so his actions led the entire world into World War II. So what started in Germany, what started with turning on the printing presses with inflation, was one of the things that ultimately not only destroyed Germany initially, but then led to World War II, which again destroyed Germany and then led to massive death and destruction and suffering throughout the entire world. So when you say, well, what does that have to do with you? It has everything to do with you. And I'll give you a more immediate example just to, give everyone a more clear understanding, and that is housing, right? Now, as we pointed out during the Biden administration, was $7 trillion of debt and uh, basically incurred and spent, which caused massive inflation. So the price of housing goes up or went up from 20 to 40%, depending on where you were. And as alluded to earlier, I think the prior segment, uh, the cost of financing the house, interest rates, mortgage rates basically doubled. So it was a double whammy. So inflation has everything to do with you. So, we got to be on top of it. And we have to hold these politicians who make these crazy promises, well, not only accountable, but, ideally we throw the bums out, right? Or better yet, we make sure they never get into office. Um, And I really think that there's no politician that should ever be elected into office if they are not financially literate. Why? Because they don't know because of that, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, they don't know that by lighting that match and throwing it toward gasoline that it blows up. I mean, their policies, consider you know, inflation. And at that time, they were told, during 2020 to 2024, they were told again and again and again and again, "Don't do this. Don't pass and spend all this money because they controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. But they did it anyway, and we as a nation cannot survive that way. But the flip side of the coin is when we know about these things and when we ensure that people that are in public office, um, can make sound financial decisions, then we could all prosper. And isn't that what we want? I know it's what you want, and there's a way to do it. I mean, on not only on an individual level, but on a city level, on a state level, and on a national level. And the best way we can do that is to make sure that, we are financially literate, that we do understand these kinds of things. Um, and so, uh it's worthwhile to not only know these ideas, these concepts, but to master them. So to the point where you don't even have to think about it, right? I mean, like driving a car, you don't really think about every little thing because you know it inside and out. And um, well, all right, that is going to do it for now. And look forward to seeing you next time.